What would a millionaire do upon discovering that the innocent girl before him had never been touched? When she whispered, "Can you teach me?" he made a decision that would change everything forever. Tell me, where are you watching from? If you want to know what this powerful man did with this pure young woman, subscribe to the channel and drop a like. This story will leave you speechless. The September sun cast luminous diamonds through the immense glass windows of the office, creating dancing prisms on the precious hardwood floor. Elliot Thorne stood motionless, his back to the door, contemplating New York City stretched at his feet like a conquered kingdom. At 41, with slightly graying temples and a steely gaze, he embodied implacable success, the kind that leaves no room for doubt or hesitation. His real estate empire, built over 18 years of ruthless negotiations and calculated decisions, had become his only true identity. The biggest lie we tell ourselves is that success fills all the voids. This thought crossed his mind at the exact moment the door opened without him turning around. The light scent of jasmine, simple and delicate, was the first thing he noticed, so different from the luxurious fragrances that usually permeated his offices. "Mr. Thorne?" The voice was soft, slightly trembling. He turned slowly, expecting another temporary assistant sent by the agency. What he saw, however, was an apparition that seemed to have crossed another century to reach him. A young woman, 20 at most, stood before him, clutching a worn folder to her chest as if it were a shield. Her eyes, a bright emerald green, widened at the panoramic view offered by the office, not hiding her wonder. "You are?" he asked, surprised not to have been informed of this visit. "Avery Collins from the Brooklyn Public Library," she answered, advancing with a hesitant step. "They sent me to catalog your private collection of first editions." Elliot imperceptibly furrowed his brow. He had indeed contacted the municipal library on the advice of his lawyer, who had suggested a tax-advantageous donation of his inherited collection. He was expecting an experienced librarian, not this young woman with visibly trembling hands. "You seem too young to be an expert in rare books," he observed, unable to mask a hint of condescension. Avery straightened her shoulders slightly, as if to give herself courage. Her eyes met his with unexpected intensity. "Appearances can be deceiving, Mr. Thorne. Like your books, which seem to be mere collectibles while they contain entire worlds." The air suddenly seemed to thicken between them. Elliot, accustomed to million-dollar negotiations and calculating faces, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pure curiosity, devoid of strategic interest. "Could you teach me?" she suddenly murmured, looking at the private library extending behind a half-open door. "Teach you what exactly? To understand what makes these books so precious to you?" What Elliot still didn't know, as he invited her with a gesture to follow him toward his library, was that this seemingly simple question had just shaken the foundations of his carefully orchestrated existence. Elliot Thorne's private library occupied the east wing of his penthouse on Fifth Avenue. The space, designed by a renowned interior architect, resembled more a museum than a living space. Bulletproof glass cases protected the most precious works, while solid oak shelves rose to the ceiling, requiring a sliding ladder to reach the upper shelves. Avery stopped at the threshold, paralyzed by the spectacle. Her breathing had accelerated, and Elliot observed with fascination as her eyes eagerly traveled over the titles, as if she were reading a treasure map. "It's the most beautiful library I've ever seen," she finally whispered. He shrugged with studied nonchalance. "It's just an investment. Most of these books increase in value every year." Avery gave him a look that revealed a mixture of incomprehension and compassion. "You never read them?" The question, in its simplicity, disconcerted him. Of course he didn't read them. Who had time to read when managing an empire? These books were an asset like any other, a line in his balance sheet. "I don't have the luxury of free time, Miss Collins." She approached a display case, where rested a rare copy of Moby Dick by Melville. Her fingers stopped a few millimeters from the glass, not daring to touch it. "Time isn't a luxury, Mr. Thorne. It's a choice. We all choose how to spend this invisible currency." The tone wasn't accusatory, simply matter of fact, but Elliot felt an inexplicable irritation rise within him. This girl who came from nowhere was presuming to lecture him. Him who had built his empire since he was 23, starting from almost nothing. "I suggest you focus on your cataloging work," he said abruptly. My assistant will show you where to set up. You'll have access to this room between 9 and 5, Monday through Friday." He was about to turn on his heel when Avery opened her worn folder and extracted a handwritten sheet. "This is the list of your first editions that the library has already catalogued. There's an inconsistency regarding the copy of The Great Gatsby that you own. According to our records, it would be a Philadelphia edition of 1925, but the insurance value indicated corresponds rather to the original New York edition of 1925. Elliot retraced his steps, intrigued despite himself. "That's impossible. I bought this book from Sotheby's 5 years ago." Avery handed him an article cut from a specialized magazine. "The Philadelphia counterfeit editions of the time are sometimes so well made that even experts can be fooled, but there's a simple way to verify." For the first time in a long time, Elliot felt outmatched in his own field. This unpleasant feeling, mixed with growing curiosity, led him to make an unusual decision. "Show me," he said simply. Avery's eyes lit up with a passion that struck him like an unexpected wave. During the next 2 hours, completely forgetting his afternoon appointments, Elliot watched this young woman meticulously examine his precious work, explaining to him the subtleties of watermarks, paper composition, and typographical peculiarities that distinguished an original edition from a counterfeit. "There," she finally said, with a victorious smile on her lips. "It is indeed an original New York edition of 1925. The library was wrong. It wasn't so much the confirmation of the authenticity of his purchase that disturbed Elliot, but the way Avery delicately caressed the binding of the book as if it were a living being. You really love them, don't you?" "Books?" The question had come out before he could hold it back. "They were my first friends," she replied simply, without elaborating. Accompanying her toward the exit, Elliot was surprised to find himself slowing his pace, instinctively seeking to prolong their conversation. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Thorne," she said, retrieving her worn shoulder bag. "Until tomorrow," he repeated, troubled by the idea that for the first time in months he had something to anticipate. During the 2 weeks that followed, Elliot was surprised to find himself subtly modifying his habits. He who usually lunched in starred restaurants with business partners began returning to his penthouse around noon, under the pretext of having to make confidential calls. In reality, he was discreetly settling in the small lounge adjacent to the library, from where he could observe Avery working. What he saw fascinated him more and more. The young woman had a particular way of interacting with books, so different from his. Where he saw valuable objects, she seemed to perceive companions. She often read aloud when she thought she was alone, sometimes stopping to smile at a turn of phrase or frown at a difficult passage. Even more surprising, one day he caught her speaking to a particularly ancient volume as if it could hear her. "You must have seen things over 3 centuries, haven't you?" she murmured, while gently dusting the cover with a special brush. That day, unable to resist any longer, Elliot entered the library, making Avery jump. "Am I disturbing you?" he asked, amused to see her blush. I didn't hear you coming in," she stammered, hastily replacing the book on its support. "Do you often talk to them? To the books, I mean." Avery hesitated, visibly embarrassed, then decided not to lie. "Yes, always have. Each book carries within it the imprints of those who held it before us. It's like a receptacle of souls." Instead of mocking her as she might have expected, Elliot approached and took a seat in the chair facing her. "My grandfather used to do the same thing," he confided. "He's the one who started this collection. He was a literature professor at Harvard. I inherited it 13 years ago." "You must have been close to him," Avery observed. Elliot slightly turned his gaze away, surprised by his own willingness to share this memory. "He was different from the rest of my family. He believed that books shaped us more than money, a notion that my father, a banker by profession, found perfectly ridiculous." "And you, what did you think?" The question was simple, but it touched a sensitive point. What did he really think? It had been so long since he had asked himself these kinds of questions. "I was 28 when he died. At that age, I was already convinced that my father was right. I took this collection as capital to be invested." Avery nodded slowly without apparent judgment, but Elliot thought he detected a glimmer of sadness in her eyes. "Yet you kept them. All of them. You could have sold them." Elliot rose abruptly, suddenly uncomfortable. I should get back to work. But before he reached the door, Avery called out to him, I found something strange today. A book that isn't on any list. She handed him a small volume bound in red leather with no apparent title. Elliot recognized it immediately and felt his heart skip a beat. Where did you find this? It was slipped between 2 volumes of poetry by Emily Dickinson. I opened it thinking it was an unlisted book, but Elliot took the volume with a slightly trembling hand. It wasn't a book, but a diary, that of his mother who had left when he was only 5 years old. I'm sorry, Avery murmured. I read only the first page before realizing it was a personal document. Elliot remained silent, his eyes fixed on the cover. How had this diary ended up in his grandfather's collection? His mother had left the family without leaving a trace. At least, that's what his father had always told him. Thank you, he finally said. I'll take care of it. That night, for the first time in years, Elliot Thorne didn't check the stock market before going to bed. He stayed awake until dawn, devouring page after page the confessions of a woman he had never really known, discovering abandoned dreams, silent sacrifices, and a deep love for a son she had to leave. The last lines, written with a trembling hand, revealed a truth he would never have suspected. His mother hadn't left by choice but had been driven out by a father who couldn't bear that she wanted to resume her studies. When dawn peeked through the windows of his bedroom, Elliot realized he was crying. Tears he hadn't shed for more than 3.5 decades. You look terrible. Avery's remark the next morning was direct but tinged with concern. Elliot, who had just entered the library with 2 cups of coffee, sketched a tired smile. I didn't sleep. He handed her one of the cups, a gesture that surprised them both with its sudden familiarity. Thank you, she said, taking the coffee cautiously. Is it because of the diary? Elliot sat heavily in the leather armchair near the window, observing New York awakening below. How to explain to this young woman that he had just spent the night reconsidering his entire existence? My mother didn't abandon her family as I believed for 36 years, he finally said. She was forced to leave. By my father. Avery approached and sat down in front of him, her gaze full of compassion. I'm sorry. Elliot shook his head. The worst part is that I look so much like my father today. I built my life following his model, convinced that he represented strength, success. It's never too late to change models, Avery gently suggested. Elliot really looked at her for the first time that morning. She always carried that almost anachronistic simplicity, a sky-blue dress, worn ballet flats, a beige cardigan. Nothing in her appearance evoked the modern, hurried, and flashy era he usually frequented. Who are you really, Avery Collins? He suddenly asked. How does a girl your age know so much about rare books and talk about values as if she had lived several lives? A veil of melancholy passed over Avery's face. She brought the cup to her lips, seeming to search for words. I grew up in an orphanage run by nuns in Vermont, she finally said. My parents died in an accident when I was 2 years old. The sisters taught me to read using illustrated gospels. At 7, I was already devouring everything I could get my hands on. Elliot felt something tighten in his chest. This young woman who seemed so fragile had gone through a trial he couldn't even imagine. How did you end up in New York? At 18, when I had to leave the orphanage, Sister Margaret, who knew my passion for books, recommended me to the Brooklyn Public Library. They hired me as an assistant, and I quickly showed an interest in ancient works. The curator trained me. Now I'm saving to take evening classes at Columbia. The contrast between their lives was striking. Him born into a wealthy family despite his mother's absence, with all the opportunities money offered. Her, raised without parents, in an austere setting, with no other wealth than the books they allowed her to read. Doesn't it make you angry? He asked. This injustice from the start. Avery seemed to reflect seriously on the question. Anger consumes too much energy, she finally said. I prefer to invest it in building what I want to become. This response, in its simplicity, deeply shook Elliot. He who had spent so many years proving his worth, accumulating wealth as if to fill a void, found himself facing someone who, with almost nothing, seemed to have reached a serenity he didn't know. His phone vibrated, breaking this moment of contemplation. It was a message from his financial director, reminding him of the crucial afternoon meeting regarding the potential sale of his company to an American conglomerate. This transaction represented the pinnacle of his career, the ultimate validation of everything he had built. However, for the first time, Elliot felt a profound doubt. "Teach me," he suddenly said, repeating the question Avery had asked him during their first meeting. "Teach me to understand what these words meant to you." Avery's eyes lit up with a light Elliot had never seen in any of his associates, even during the most successful negotiations. "Where do you want to start?" she asked simply. "It's madness, Elliot. You can't cancel this sale now." The voice of Marcus Sullivan, his lawyer and oldest friend, resonated in Elliot's private office. 3 weeks had passed since the discovery of the diary, and what had begun as a simple curiosity for Avery's knowledge had transformed into a deep reconsideration. Elliot, standing in front of the window, observed the rain falling on New York, transforming the city lights into trembling jewels. "My decision is made, Marcus. I will not sell." Marcus nervously ran a hand through his graying hair. "Do you realize you'll lose hundreds of millions? That the investors might sue you for breach of preliminary contract? That your reputation in the business—" "My reputation?" Elliot interrupted with a bitter laugh. "That of a man who exchanges his soul for numbers on an account?" Marcus approached his friend, genuinely concerned. "What's happening to you, Elliot? Since when do you talk about soul? You've worked your whole life for this moment." Elliot turned to his friend, and Marcus was struck by the change he perceived in his gaze. A new clarity, almost feverish. "I discovered something, Marcus, about my mother." He then told him about the discovery of the diary, the revelations about his father's behavior, and how this founding lie had oriented his entire existence toward a quest for material success devoid of meaning. "I understand it's a shock," Marcus conceded, "but from there to sabotage your entire work." "My work," Elliot repeated. "Glass and steel buildings, faceless transactions. Is that really all I want to leave behind me?" Marcus observed him attentively, then his expression changed, as if he had just understood something. "It's because of her, isn't it? This library girl you've been talking about for weeks." Elliot looked away, but that brief moment was enough for Marcus to confirm his suspicions. "You barely know her, Elliot. You're going through a midlife crisis and she's, how old, 22? 20, Elliot automatically corrected. "And it's not what you think. She has simply opened my eyes." Marcus sighed deeply, recognizing the determination on his friend's face. "What do you intend to do then, if you don't sell?" Elliot went to his desk and extracted a folder that he handed to Marcus. "I want to create a foundation to bring literature to disadvantaged communities across America. Community libraries, reading programs, scholarships." Marcus quickly scanned the document, his face moving from incredulity to resignation. "You're serious?" "More than I've ever been, and I want Avery to run the project." At this last phrase, Marcus abruptly closed the folder. "Elliot, think for a moment. You want to entrust millions of dollars to a girl you've known for how long? A month. She understands better than anyone the transformative value of books. She has lived this transformation." Marcus shook his head, conquered by his friend's determination. "I hope you know what you're doing, because if you announce this to the board of directors tomorrow, you'll trigger an earthquake." Elliot smiled, with a serenity that Marcus had never seen in him. "Sometimes, Marcus, one must destroy to rebuild." That night, after Marcus's departure, Elliot remained standing for a long time in front of the library, brushing the bindings that Avery had touched. Tomorrow, he would risk everything, his fortune, his reputation, his life's work. Yet for the first time since he had been an adult, he felt perfectly at peace with himself. His phone vibrated, displaying a message from Avery. "I found another treasure today. An ex-libris of your grandfather in a Whitman from 1881. He had written, 'True wealth is that which survives fire and thieves.'" Elliot smiled. Tomorrow, he would put his wealth to the test of fire. "You want me to—" "What?" Avery stood in the middle of the library, her face expressing a mixture of incredulity and wonder. Elliot had just outlined his foundation project and the role he wished to entrust to her. "I want you to direct the foundation," he repeated calmly. "You have the vision, the passion, and the integrity needed." Avery sat down slowly, visibly overwhelmed by the proposal. "But I have no experience in management. I don't even have a college degree." "Experience can be acquired. As for the degree—" Elliot extracted an envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. "I took the liberty of enrolling you in a literature program at Columbia, evening classes as you wished." The foundation will cover all expenses. Silent tears began to flow down Avery's cheeks. She took the envelope with a trembling hand, unable to speak. I understood something in these last few weeks, continued Elliot, approaching to kneel in front of her, their faces now at the same height. All my life I have pursued a definition of success that wasn't mine. I built an empire, but I was its prisoner. Avery wiped her tears, gradually finding her voice. Why me? Because you see beauty where I saw only numbers. Because you reminded me who I could have been if I hadn't lost my way. A silence charged with emotion settled between them. Avery finally opened the envelope and scanned the registration documents, her expression moving from emotion to determination. If I accept, she finally said, I have one condition. Elliot raised an eyebrow, surprised. Which one? That you teach me everything you know about the business world, management, finance. If I am to direct this foundation, I want to be up to the task. A smile illuminated Elliot's face. Deal. The 5 months that followed completely transformed their lives. Avery proved to be an exceptional student, absorbing management and finance knowledge with astounding rapidity. Elliot, for his part, rediscovered the simple pleasure of reading for pleasure, guided by Avery's passionate recommendations. Together, they developed the foundation's plan, identifying disadvantaged neighborhoods that would benefit from the first community libraries. Avery insisted that each space be designed respecting the local culture, incorporating architectural elements specific to each region. On a particularly intense afternoon, while they were working side by side on the selection of the first books, Avery posed a question that had been floating between them for weeks. Do you ever regret it, having given up selling your company? Elliot looked up from the catalogues he was studying. Avery was wearing that day a simple white dress, and the setting sun created a golden halo around her. He was struck by the simplicity of her beauty, so different from everything he had valued previously. Not for a second, he responded honestly. I've lost partners, opportunities, even friends. But for the first time in my adult life, I know exactly why I get up in the morning. Avery smiled, revealing that dimple on her left cheek that Elliot had learned to look for like a rare treasure. My father always told me that wealth is having enough to share, she said softly. Your father? I thought that, not my biological father, Avery clarified. The gardener at the orphanage. He took care of me when the sisters were too busy. He taught me to recognize plants, to respect the earth. He told me I should be like a tree, keep my roots deep, but extend my branches toward the sky. This confidence, offered with simplicity, touched Elliot more deeply than he would have imagined. He realized that every piece of information about Avery's life was precious to him. I would like to be that kind of man, he murmured almost to himself, a man who plants trees whose shade he may never see. Avery looked at him intensely, and something in her gaze subtly changed. You already are that man, Elliot. You've always been under all those layers of protection you had built. It was the first time she had called him by his first name, and this simple change seemed to mark a transformation in their relationship, something deeper than a mere professional collaboration. Outside, New York was gradually lighting up, as if to underline this moment of authentic connection. They remained like this, motionless in the library, bathed in golden light, aware that they had just crossed an invisible but significant threshold. The opening of the first community library in the Brooklyn neighborhood had attracted the attention of local media. The project, ambitious and generous, stood out in the usual landscape of real estate investments. Avery, dressed in a simple navy blue dress for the occasion, was speaking animatedly to a group of children fascinated by this new place intended for them. Elliot observed her from a distance, admiring her natural ability to communicate her passion. These last 6 months had transformed Avery. Always authentic, she had nevertheless gained in confidence, now mastering the subtleties of project management and institutional communication that he had taught her. Mr. Thorne? Elliot turned to face a woman in her 60s, with a face marked by years but illuminated by a lively gaze. Yes? I am Sister Margaret, from St. Francis Orphanage in Vermont. Elliot immediately recognized the name mentioned by Avery. This woman had played a crucial role in the young woman's life. It's an honor to meet you, sister. Avery has told me a lot about you. The nun's face darkened slightly. Actually, it's about Avery that I've come. I haven't been able to contact her for several days, and it's urgent. Alarmed by the nun's tone, Elliot led her to a quieter corner of the library. "What's happening?" "It's Sister Elizabeth, the one who took care of Avery when she was little. She's seriously ill, terminal cancer. The doctors are giving her very little time and she's asking to see Avery. One last time." Elliot felt his heart tighten. He knew how attached Avery was to the nuns who had raised her. "Why haven't you been able to contact her?" "Her phone seems to be out of service. I tried the Brooklyn Library, but they told me she now works for you." Elliot nodded, suddenly understanding. Avery had lost her phone 2 days ago and was still waiting for a replacement. "I'll inform her immediately, and don't worry about the medical expenses. I know excellent specialists at Mount Sinai Hospital." The nun's eyes widened in surprise. "That's very generous, Mr. Thorne, but we don't have the means to—" "Consider it a donation to your institution," Elliot gently interrupted her. "No conditions, no publicity, just a gesture of gratitude for what you've done for Avery." When Elliot informed Avery of the situation, he witnessed for the first time her complete vulnerability. She collapsed in his arms, shaken by silent sobs. Without hesitation, he arranged everything: a private jet to take them to Vermont, the best doctors for Sister Elizabeth, financial support for the orphanage that was struggling to make ends meet. During the flight, Avery remained silent, her gaze lost in the void. Elliot respected this silence, simply being present. When they landed near the orphanage, Avery suddenly took his hand. "Thank you," she murmured. "I could never have done this alone." "You're not alone anymore, Avery," he simply responded. St. Francis Orphanage was an austere 19th-century building, but surrounded by a magnificently maintained garden. Crossing the gate, Elliot was struck by the simplicity of the place, so far from the luxury he was accustomed to. Sister Elizabeth was bedridden in a small room with white walls, her frail body lost among immaculate sheets. When Avery entered, the old woman's face lit up with transcendent joy. "My little Avery," she murmured in a weak voice. "You came." Elliot remained at a distance, observing their reunion with emotion. The tenderness between these two beings was palpable, testifying to a bond that went well beyond that of an institution and its resident. Later, while Avery had remained at the nun's bedside, Elliot walked the corridors of the orphanage, discovering the universe that had shaped the young woman. The simple but clean dormitories, the modest but carefully maintained library, the chapel with chipped stained glass windows that projected fragments of rainbow on the stone floor. "She was different from the other children," said a voice behind him. Elliot turned to discover an elderly nun leaning on a cane. Different? Avery had this inner light. From a very young age, she transformed every difficulty into a learning opportunity. When the other children complained about the cold in winter, she invented stories about ice princesses to make them laugh. When the food was too simple, she pretended they were in a medieval castle living a great adventure. Elliot smiled, perfectly recognizing the Avery he knew in this description. "She hasn't changed, then?" The nun observed him with curiosity. "You love her, don't you?" The question, posed with disarming simplicity, caught Elliot off guard. Did he love Avery? He had never put a name to the complex feelings he experienced in her presence. I care about her very much," he finally admitted. The old woman nodded with an enigmatic smile. "Love is the only wealth that increases when shared, Mr. Thorne. Don't wait too long to understand that." With these words, she walked away, leaving Elliot alone with his troubled thoughts. For the first time, he considered the possibility that what he felt for Avery went well beyond admiration or even affection. It was something deeper, more fundamental, something that dangerously resembled that word he had always avoided. Love. Thorne, philanthropist or hypocrite? The headline spread across the front page of the economic newspaper that Marcus had just thrown onto Elliot's desk. The article, signed by a renowned investigative journalist, detailed how, 8 years earlier, Elliot had closed several textile factories in Louisiana, leaving more than 400 people unemployed to maximize his group's profits. "They've brought out everything," Marcus commented, with a grave expression. "The layoffs, the low-price acquisitions, even that pollution story at the New Orleans factory that we managed to hush up." Elliot scanned the article, feeling a nausea gradually invade him. The facts were coldly presented, without lies, but without any contextual nuance. Everything he had done at the time was legal, certainly, but seen in this light, It appeared morally repugnant. "How did they obtain this information?" he asked, with a tight throat. Marcus shrugged. "Someone from your entourage, probably. You hurt a lot of egos by cancelling the sale and launching your foundation. Revenge is a dish best served cold." Elliot rose and approached the window. Below he could make out a small group of protesters beginning to gather in front of the building of his headquarters. "What do they want?" "Justice, reparation, public apologies. The classic," Marcus responded, approaching. "The problem is that this story comes at the worst time. The Foundation has just opened its third library. The media was just beginning to adhere to your new positioning." Elliot passed a hand over his face, suddenly very tired. "Is Avery aware?" "Not yet, but it won't be long. This kind of news spreads like wildfire." As if to confirm his words, the office door opened abruptly, letting Avery in. Her face was pale, her reddened eyes betraying that she had recently cried. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble, brandishing the same newspaper. Marcus discreetly slipped away, leaving Elliot to face this moment he feared more than anything. "Avery, let me explain." "Is it true?" she repeated, her voice slightly trembling. "These people, these families, did you really—" Elliot briefly closed his eyes, unable to lie. "Yes, it's true. But the context was different. Those factories were no longer profitable Asian competition. Human lives, Elliot," Avery interrupted him. "Not numbers on a spreadsheet. Real lives, people who had children to feed, homes to pay for." The disappointment he read in her gaze was unbearable. During these last 7 months he had strived to be better, to rebuild himself according to ethics he had long ignored. And now his past was resurfacing, as if to remind him that one never completely sheds one's old skins. "I was different back then," he pleaded. "I only saw profit, growth." "And now?" Avery asked, a flicker of wavering hope in her eyes. "What do you see now?" Elliot approached her, carefully choosing his words. "I see the consequences of my actions. I see beyond the numbers. I see you." Avery seemed to yield for an instant, but she recovered. "It's not enough, Elliot. These people deserve more than words. They deserve actions. What do you want me to do?" Avery's gaze became more determined, more intense. "Publicly acknowledge your mistakes, present sincere apologies, create a reparation fund for the communities you have hurt, show that your transformation isn't just a facade, that it's real and deep." Elliot felt an inner resistance rise within him. The idea of publicly humiliating himself, of acknowledging his mistakes in front of the whole world, hurt his deeply rooted pride. "You're asking me to bring to its knees everything I've built," he said, with a hint of bitterness in his voice. Avery approached and gently placed her hand on his cheek, a gesture of an intimacy they had never shared before. "I'm asking you to show the world the man I know now, not the one you were then." That evening, alone in his penthouse, Elliot faced the worst inner crisis of his life. On one side, his entire being, formed by decades of ambition and pride, rebelled against the idea of publicly admitting his mistakes. On the other, the man he was slowly becoming since his meeting with Avery whispered to him that it was precisely this kind of difficult choice that defined his new path. Around midnight, exhausted by this inner battle, he pulled out his mother's diary and reread a passage that had particularly struck him. "Honesty is a luxury that many cannot afford. But when one can, it is the most precious of investments." By dawn, his decision was made. He would organize a press conference, admit his mistakes, and announce concrete reparation measures. It would be painful, even humiliating, but it was the price to pay to become the man he wanted to be, the man that Avery saw in him. The conference room of the convention center was packed. Journalists, former employees of the Louisiana factories, business partners, and curious onlookers had gathered to hear Elliot Thorne speak about the revelations that had shaken his image of a newly converted philanthropist. Backstage, Elliot nervously adjusted his tie. For the first time since the beginning of his business career, he was going to speak without a prepared script, without language elements carefully calibrated by a communication team. Avery was at his side, silent but present. Her support, though tinged with moral demand, gave him the strength he needed. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Marcus asked one last time, visibly worried. "The lawyers say we could counterattack on legal grounds, divert attention." "No," Elliot firmly cut in. No more diversions, no more avoidance strategies. It's time to face the truth. An assistant came to inform them that everything was ready. Before heading toward the stage, Elliot turned to Avery. "Whatever happens after today, know that you have changed me, deeply." She smiled at him, her eyes shining with contained emotion. "It's you who chose to change, Elliot. I only reminded you who you truly were." Silence fell instantly when Elliot mounted the stage. The flashes of cameras crackled, blinding. He took a deep breath and began to speak. 8 years ago, I made a series of decisions that broke lives. I closed profitable factories to make them even more profitable. I ignored the human impact of my choices, hiding behind numbers and strategies. I am here today, not to justify myself, but to fully acknowledge my mistakes. A murmur ran through the room. No one expected such direct confessions. In recent months, I have undertaken a path of personal and professional transformation. This is not a marketing strategy, nor an attempt to rehabilitate my image. It is a profound realization that success, if not guided by human values, is just an empty shell. He paused, seeking Avery with his gaze. She was in the front row, her face reflecting a pride that gave him the courage to continue. "Today, I announce the creation of a $50 million reparation fund for the communities affected by my past decisions. This fund will finance professional training, local business creations, and cultural projects in Louisiana. I personally commit to meeting each affected family, listening to their stories, and working with them to repair to the extent possible the harm I caused them." Questions immediately exploded, some respectful, others accusatory. Elliot answered each one with disarming honesty, without seeking to minimize his responsibility. When a former worker asked him how he could be sure that his transformation was sincere, his response touched Avery deeply. "I can't prove it to you today. Words are easy, promises too. Only time and my future actions will testify to my sincerity. All I can tell you is that I recently discovered that a life dedicated solely to the accumulation of wealth is a wasted life. My mother knew it. She tried to teach me, but it took me almost 4 decades to understand." After the conference, emotionally exhausted but strangely light, Elliot rejoined Avery in a small adjacent room. "You were brave," she said simply. "I was honest, it's different," he responded with a weak smile. "Courage would have been making the right choices 8 years ago." Avery approached, and in a gesture that surprised them both, took his hand in hers. True courage is acknowledging one's mistakes and changing. Many go through their entire lives without ever managing to do so. Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by Marcus, who entered precipitously, his face unusually animated. "Elliot, you need to come. Someone wants to see you." "Who?" "Sister Catherine from St. Francis Orphanage. She says she has something important to tell you. About your mother." Elliot's heart skipped a beat. Avery and he exchanged a stunned look before following Marcus to a small meeting room where an elderly nun awaited them, sitting peacefully, her hands joined on her knees. "Mr. Thorne," she said, rising with difficulty, "I apologize for coming like this without warning, but after seeing you on television, I knew I had to talk to you." "Talk to me about my mother," asked Elliot, with a tight throat. The nun slowly nodded. "Helena and I were childhood friends in Boston. We grew up together, shared our dreams, our hopes. When she married your father, I was already a novice. We kept in touch for a few years. Then life separated us." She pulled from her bag a small package wrapped in a delicate fabric. "When I learned of her illness years later, I went to see her in the hospital. She entrusted this to me, making me promise to keep it until you were ready to receive it. I believe that moment has come." Elliot took the package with a trembling hand. Inside were letters, yellowed photographs, and a small notebook. In one of the photos, a smiling young woman stood in front of a modest school in Vermont, surrounded by children with luminous faces. "Your mother was a teacher in disadvantaged communities before falling ill and moving away," Sister Catherine gently explained. "She dedicated her time and energy to planting seeds of hope in difficult terrains. She firmly believed that education was the only true path to freedom." Avery had approached and was looking at the photos over Elliot's shoulder, moved by this discovery. "Everything you're building with the foundation," she murmured. "It's her legacy that you're honoring without knowing it." Elliot couldn't speak. An emotion too powerful constricted his throat as he realized that his recent transformation wasn't so much a change of direction as a return to roots he had forgotten, to a part of himself that he had buried under decades of misdirected ambition. "She would be proud of you today," said Sister Catherine with a gentle smile. "Of the man you are becoming." That night, in the silence of his apartment, Elliot read each letter, examined each photo, absorbed each fragment of this mother he had never really known. And for the first time since his childhood, he cried without restraint, releasing a pain he had carried for almost 4 decades without even knowing it. Reconstruction was a fragile process, Elliot was learning day by day. Despite the generally positive reception of his public apologies and the effective implementation of the reparation fund, some wounds remained raw. In the Louisiana communities affected by the factory closures, mistrust persisted. "They're right to doubt," said Avery as they went through the preliminary reports of the committee charged with administering the fund together. "Trust is earned with time and consistency." They worked side by side in the penthouse library, which had become their informal headquarters. Since the press conference 3 weeks ago, their relationship had subtly changed. A deeper intimacy had settled between them, nurtured by the trials they had gone through together. "I have something to show you," Avery suddenly said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "I received this morning." Elliot took the envelope she was extending to him. Inside was an official letter from Columbia, confirming that Avery had brilliantly passed her first semester exams with the jury's congratulations. "That's wonderful," he exclaimed, genuinely happy for her. Avery blushed slightly, still unaccustomed to compliments. "It's thanks to you. Without your support, I would never have been able to—" "No," Elliot gently interrupted her. "It's entirely your merit. You worked harder than anyone, juggling between your studies and the foundation. I only provided the means. You provided everything else." A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire in the fireplace. Outside, the New York winter enveloped the city in a mantle of frost, transforming the rooftops into silvery landscapes. "Has your father called you?" Avery finally asked, broaching a subject that Elliot had been avoiding for days. He sighed deeply. "He left a message. I haven't called back." Since the discovery of his mother's diary, Elliot had carefully avoided any contact with his father. The revelation of the role he had played in his mother's departure had opened a wound he didn't feel ready to face. Avery observed him attentively, her gaze devoid of judgment. "You know, sometimes the monsters of our childhood are just broken men seen through the eyes of a child." This remark touched Elliot more than he wanted to admit. His father, an authoritarian and distant figure throughout his childhood, had shaped his vision of success and masculinity. Imitating him while secretly hating him had been the central paradox of his adult life. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive him," he finally admitted. Avery rose and came to sit near him on the couch, close enough for him to feel the warmth of her presence without invading his space. "Forgiveness isn't for him, Elliot. It's for you. It's the last link that binds you to the man you no longer want to be." Outside, the snow had begun to fall, covering New York with a cottony silence. Elliot observed the snowflakes dancing in the light of the street lamps, thoughtful. "He still lives in Chicago," he finally said. "We haven't spoken for more than 6 years, after an argument about—" He broke off, suddenly realizing the irony. "About the fact that I was neglecting my family for my business." Avery smiled softly. "Life has a particular sense of humor, doesn't it?" Elliot turned toward her, suddenly struck by the simplicity with which she managed to put her finger on the essential. "How do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "See so clearly through the complications we create ourselves." Avery reflected for a moment, her face illuminated by the dancing flames of the fireplace. "When you grow up with very little, you learn to distinguish the essential from the superfluous. Orphans develop a sort of forced clarity. You can't afford to get lost in emotional labyrinths when daily survival requires all your attention." Elliot felt a surge of tenderness, so intense that he was almost frightened by it. This young woman, with her wisdom born of adversity, was teaching him more about life than he had learned in 4 decades of privilege. "You can teach me to be strong like you," he said, repeating the words she had addressed to him months ago. "But let me teach you that strength is also allowing oneself to feel." Avery smiled, recognizing her own words. I believe we both have much to learn from each other." At that moment, the ringing of Elliot's phone broke their moment of intimacy. The name that appeared on the screen made him pause. "Father." Avery rose discreetly. "I'll go make us some tea," she said, heading toward the kitchen, offering him the space needed for this difficult conversation. Elliot watched the phone ring, his heart pounding. Then, with a deep breath, he answered, "Yes, Father." The voice at the other end of the line seemed older, more fragile than he remembered. "Elliot, I saw you on television. That press conference." A heavy silence settled between them, charged with 4 decades of unspoken words and resentments. "I found Mom's diary," Elliot finally said. "I know what really happened." A trembling sigh reached him. "I made many mistakes, Elliot. Mistakes I've spent a lifetime regretting." The unexpected honesty of this confession disconcerted Elliot. His father, this inflexible man who had never admitted to being wrong, suddenly seemed as vulnerable as he was. "I can't erase the past," the aged voice continued. "But perhaps we could try to build something new." In the kitchen, Avery was preparing tea, giving Elliot the privacy he needed. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw his face through the half-open door, the contradictory emotions that succeeded each other, the old pain rising to the surface, and finally, slowly, something that resembled acceptance. That evening marked a new turning point. Elliot had agreed to visit his father in Chicago the following weekend, a fragile first step toward a reconciliation he would never have believed possible a few months ago. "You were right," he said to Avery as they savored their tea in front of the fireplace. "Forgiveness isn't for him, but for me." Avery smiled, her eyes reflecting the flames and something deeper still, a tenderness that, slowly but surely, was transforming into love. Spring had settled over New York, bringing with it an explosion of new life. The oak trees in Central Park adorned themselves with white flowers, cafe terraces came alive, and a feeling of renewal floated in the air. For Elliot and Avery, these last months had been a period of intense building. 3 new community libraries had opened their doors, one in the multicultural neighborhood of Harlem, another in a tough district of New Orleans, and the third in an isolated village in Vermont, in homage to the work of Elliot's mother. "Look at this," said Avery with excitement, handing her phone to Elliot. They were sitting at a small cafe table near Washington Square Park, enjoying a rare morning of relaxation. On the screen was an article from the New York Times titled, "The Silent Revolution of Thorn Libraries When Literature Rebuilds Communities." "They talk about the mentoring program for young writers," Avery continued, "and the workshops for the elderly. The testimonies are incredible." Elliot scanned the article, touched by the stories it told. A teenager from Brooklyn who had discovered Emily Dickinson and published his first poems, a grandmother from Harlem who had learned to read at 70, a former Louisiana worker who now led writing workshops. "It's your work, Avery," he said, returning her phone. "Your vision." She shook her head, a smile on her lips. "Our vision. I could never have realized it without you." Their relationship had subtly evolved over the months. A deep complicity had settled between them, transcending differences in age and experience. They had never put a name to this bond, contenting themselves with letting it grow naturally, like a rare plant one takes care not to force. "I've been thinking about something for a few weeks," said Elliot, setting down his coffee cup. "I'd like to take you somewhere. A place important to me." Avery looked at him with curiosity. "Where?" "Boston. My grandfather's house is still there, uninhabited since his death. I would like to—" He hesitated, searching for words. "I would like to make something special of it, and I need your help for this." 2 days later, they took the train to Massachusetts. The journey was silent, Elliot lost in his childhood memories, Avery respecting his introspection. When they finally arrived in front of the house, a beautiful 19th-century bourgeois residence nestled in a historic neighborhood, Elliot stopped for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. "The last time I came here was for the funeral," he murmured. "I've never had the courage to return since then." Avery gently took his hand, this simple contact giving him the strength he needed. Together, they crossed the rusted gate and went up the weed-invaded path. Elliot unlocked the front door with an ancient key he had kept all these years. The interior was exactly as in his memories, frozen in time. White sheets covered the furniture, creating ghostly shapes in the half-light. A thick layer of dust testified to the years of abandonment. "It was here," said Elliot, leading Avery to a large room at the back of the house, his library. Even covered with dust and partially emptied, the room maintained a particular atmosphere. Tall windows let in a golden light that danced on the empty shelves and worn parquet. "When I was a child, I spent hours here," Elliot continued, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "He would read me stories, talk to me about distant countries, philosophers, and poets. It's here that I learned to love books, before the adult world turned me away from them." Avery slowly walked around the room, brushing the shelves, as if she could feel the imprint of the books that had been there. "What do you imagine for this place?" she finally asked. Elliot approached the window, contemplating the vegetation-invaded garden. "A library different from those we've already created. A residence for writers in difficulty, for young talents from disadvantaged backgrounds. A place where they could live, write, be accompanied by mentors." Avery smiled, moved by this vision. "Your grandfather would have loved this idea." "There's something else," added Elliot. "I want it to be your project entirely. For you to conceive it, direct it, put your soul into it." Avery looked at him with surprise. "But the foundation in New York, Marcus can take care of daily management. You've built a formidable team. It's time for you to have your own project, something that truly bears your signature." The proposal was unexpected, and Avery remained silent for a moment, measuring its implications. "Why me, Elliot?" He approached her, reducing the distance that separated them. "Because you understand what it means to find refuge in words when the real world is too difficult. Because you know what it means to dream beyond one's condition. And because—" he hesitated before continuing, "because I know no one who has a soul as beautiful as yours." The intensity of his words created a moment of shared vulnerability between them. Avery felt her heart accelerate, aware that something fundamental was changing in their relationship. "I accept," she said simply, "on one condition." "Which?" "That you come regularly, that this place also becomes a refuge for you, a place where you can reconnect with the boy who loved books before becoming the man who collected them." Elliot smiled, touched by her insight. "Deal." That evening, they dined in a small restaurant in Old Boston, evoking their projects for the house. Avery's excitement was contagious, her ideas crowding with enthusiasm. She was already imagining the workspaces, the rooms for residents, the garden transformed into a place for reading and meditation. Watching her speak with this passion, Elliot realized something obvious yet overwhelming. He had fallen in love, not in an irrational flash of lightning, but in a deep love built day by day through shared trials and common dreams. This realization left him silent for a moment, lost in the contemplation of this unexpected miracle. He who had spent his life avoiding authentic attachment, privileging superficial and calculated relationships, now found himself completely disarmed by the feelings that invaded him. "Elliot, are you listening to me?" asked Avery, bringing him back to reality. "Sorry, I was elsewhere." She smiled, a mischievous glint in her gaze. "In numbers and contracts?" "No," he responded honestly. "In a future I would never have imagined a year ago." That night, on the train that took them back to New York, Avery fell asleep against his shoulder. Elliot remained awake, watching the nocturnal landscapes pass at full speed, similar to the changes that had transformed his life. A certainty had settled in him. Whatever happened next, he would never go back. The inauguration of the Boston Writers' Residence was scheduled for mid-June. During the preceding weeks, Avery invested body and soul in this project, supervising renovations, selecting furniture, constituting the new library. The old bourgeois mansion was coming back to life, its walls once again imbued with a soul. Elliot, divided between managing his affairs and his involvement in the foundation, made frequent trips back and forth, bringing his support and advice. Their collaboration had become a perfectly orchestrated dance, each anticipating the needs and ideas of the other. However, 10 days before the inauguration, an unexpected drama came to upset their plans. A phone call in the middle of the night woke Elliot. "Mr. Thorne, this is the director of the New Orleans Library. There's been a fire." Elliot's heart painfully tightened. "Any injured?" "No, thank God. The fire broke out after closing, but the damage is considerable." Elliot woke Avery, who was sleeping in the guest room of his penthouse. In a few minutes they were dressed and on their way to Teterboro Airport, where a private jet awaited them. The flight was silent, each immersed in their thoughts. Upon their arrival in New Orleans, a desolate scene awaited them. The library, inaugurated barely 3 months earlier, was now only a blackened structure. Firefighters continued to spray the last hotspots, and an acrid smell of burnt paper impregnated the morning air. Avery slowly approached the building, her face reflecting an almost physical pain. This library, implanted in one of the most difficult districts of the Louisiana city, had been her most ambitious project. Beyond books, she had installed a digital space, a writing workshop, and even a small theater for public readings. "The preliminary investigation indicates an electrical problem," explained the fire captain, joining them. "Nothing criminal, apparently." This news should have been a relief, but it only accentuated the feeling of powerlessness. A stupid, banal accident had been enough to reduce months of work to ashes. While Elliot discussed with authorities and insurers, Avery moved away, unable to bear the sight of the ruins any longer. He found her half an hour later, sitting on a bench in the small adjacent park, her gaze empty. "I'm sorry," he said, taking a seat beside her. She didn't respond immediately, lost in her thoughts. "All those books," she finally murmured. "All those dreams." Elliot took her hand, squeezing it gently in his own. "We'll rebuild. Bigger, more beautiful." For the first time since he had known her, Avery seemed completely defeated. "What's the point, Elliot?" "A fire, a flood, an act of vandalism. It's so fragile, what we're trying to build. So vulnerable." He understood that this reaction went beyond the fire itself. Avery, who had made resilience her way of life, suddenly seemed exhausted by this constant struggle against adversity. "You taught me that true wealth can be rebuilt," he said softly, taking up her own words. "Let's do better." She turned toward him, her face on which tears were beginning to dry. "How?" "By involving the community, by transforming this reconstruction into an opportunity." In the days that followed, Elliot implemented a bold plan. Instead of calling on external companies, he proposed training the neighborhood residents in building trades, thus creating jobs while rebuilding the library. Avery, progressively infected by this enthusiasm, suggested organizing literary events outdoors during the works to maintain the connection with readers. The community's response exceeded all their expectations. Volunteers presented themselves by the dozens. Entire families brought their support. The women of the neighborhood prepared meals for the workers. The children decorated the construction site barriers with colorful drawings and quotes from their favorite books. One evening, as the sun was setting on the bustling construction site, Avery and Elliot observed this human anthill from a nearby terrace. "It's incredible," said Avery. "I would never have imagined such mobilization." Elliot smiled, handing her a glass of fresh lemonade. "You've created much more than a library, Avery. You've sown the seeds of a community." She looked at him with a new intensity, something both determined and vulnerable at the same time in her expression. "No, we have sown these seeds. Together." This "we" resonated like an implicit declaration, a confession of the feelings that had developed between them over the months. Elliot felt his heart accelerate, aware that they were approaching a point of no return. "Avery, She gently placed a finger on his lips, interrupting him. "Not now," she murmured. "Not here. Let's first finish what we've started." He understood that she wasn't just talking about the library, but about their personal journey, this transformation they were going through together. With a nod, he accepted this delay, recognizing the wisdom of her request. Upon their return to Boston 3 days later, they immersed themselves in the final preparations for the inauguration of the writer's residence. The event was to gather personalities from the literary world, representatives of the communities where they had established libraries, and the first selected residents, 6 talented young writers from disadvantaged backgrounds. The eve of the ceremony, late at night, Avery and Elliot found themselves in the grandfather's old library, now magnificently restored. The shelves were once again full of books. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and the entire atmosphere breathed that particular magic of places imbued with stories. "Your grandfather would be proud," said Avery, caressing the binding of an old volume that Elliot had brought back from his personal collection. "He would be especially proud of you," he responded, "of what you've made of this place." Avery approached the window, contemplating the moon-bathed garden. Tomorrow, everything changes. These young writers will arrive, bringing their energy, their stories. It will no longer be our little secret. Elliot joined her, observing her delicate profile in the half-light. Are you ready? She turned toward him, her face reflecting a serene determination. More than I've ever been. In this moment of calm before the storm of celebrations, something invisible but deeply significant cemented between them. A silent promise, a mutual commitment to continue this adventure, no matter where it would lead them. The inauguration of the Boston Writers' Residence was a resounding success. The literary press hailed the initiative, local politicians jostled to associate their image with the project, and above all, the 6 young residents appropriated the place with touching enthusiasm. Among them, Ethan, a 19-year-old young man originally from the Bronx, particularly attracted Avery's attention. His first novel, written urgently in school notebooks, recounted with heartbreaking precision the experience of children growing up between 2 cultures. He reminds me of myself at his age, Elliot confided to Avery as they observed the young man exploring the library with reverence. Really? Avery was surprised. I imagined you more conformist at 19. Elliot smiled, amused by this perception. I was a rebel in my own way. I wanted to study literature, not finance, as my father demanded. I wrote poetry in secret. Bad probably, but sincere. This revelation surprised Avery, offering her a new light on the man she had learned to know and, she had to admit now, to love. What made you change course? Elliot's gaze darkened slightly. A conversation with my father. He told me that literature was a luxury that only the rich could afford. That if I wanted one day to be free in my choices, I had to first build my financial security. Avery meditated on these words, better understanding Elliot's trajectory. And now? Do you feel free? The question, simple in appearance, touched the very essence of his recent transformation. Elliot reflected on it seriously. I'm beginning to be, he finally said. Thanks to you. The rest of the day unfolded in a whirlwind of activities, guided tours, interviews, meetings with local partners. It was only late in the evening, when most of the guests had left and the residents had retired to their rooms, that Avery and Elliot finally found a moment of calm. They settled in the small private lounge adjoining Elliot's apartments, exhausted but satisfied. The fire crackling in the fireplace created an intimate atmosphere, conducive to confidences. I have something for you, said Elliot, extracting a small box from his jacket. Avery took it with curiosity. Inside was an ancient key, similar to the one that opened the main door of the house. What is it? The key to the small house at the bottom of the garden. I had it restored in secret during the works. It was my grandfather's old study. Avery looked at him, intrigued. Why give it to me? Because I saw how you looked at that house on the first day. As if you saw something in it that no one else could see. I wanted to offer you this as a space all your own. To write, to think, to simply be yourself. Emotion overwhelmed Avery, who pressed the key against her heart. How do you do that? She asked softly. Do what? Understand me so deeply. See parts of me that I never show. Elliot approached, reducing the distance between them. I look at you, Avery. Really. As no one had taught me to look before you. A charged silence settled, punctuated only by the crackling of the flames. Avery felt her heart beat wildly, aware that this moment marked a decisive turning point in their relationship. I'm afraid, she finally confessed. Of what? Of what's happening between us, of these feelings I hadn't foreseen, that I don't control. Elliot took her hand, delicately intertwining their fingers. I know. I'm afraid too. This admission of mutual vulnerability created a bridge between them, a connection even deeper than all those they had shared previously. I didn't want to fall in love, Avery murmured, her eyes shining with contained tears. Especially not with someone like you, so different from me, with so much power, so much influence. I was afraid of losing myself, of being just one more project, a cause to defend. Elliot felt his heart tighten in the face of this brutal honesty. And now? Avery looked him straight in the eyes, with that mixture of strength and vulnerability that characterized her. Now I know that you don't see me as a project or a cause. You see me, with my strengths and my weaknesses, my dreams and my fears. You've offered me opportunities, but you've never tried to shape me according to your expectations. You've let me be myself, grow at my own pace." She paused, searching for words. "And you? What have you found in this unexpected relationship?" Elliot took his time to respond, aware of the importance of each word. "I've found the way back to myself, the man I could have been if I hadn't lost my moral compass along the way. You reminded me that a life without purpose, without true contribution, is just an empty existence, no matter the accumulated wealth." He moved closer still, gently placing his hand on her cheek. "I love you, Avery. Not despite our differences, but thanks to them. You've transformed me, and I will never go back." Time seemed suspended as Avery absorbed this declaration. Then, with a deliberate slowness, she reduced the distance between them and placed her lips on his, in a kiss that seemed to contain all the intensity of their common journey. When they separated, the world around them seemed different, as if this shared confession had altered the very texture of reality. The fire in the fireplace projected their embraced shadows on the wall, a visual symbol of this unexpected union between two souls that everything seemed destined to never meet. "And now?" Avery softly asked. Elliot smiled, once again intertwining their fingers. "Now we continue to build, together. Not just libraries or residences, but a life that has meaning. A life worthy of the books we love so much." That night, they remained talking for a long time, laughing, sharing dreams they had never dared to express before. Outside, the Massachusetts sky adorned itself with stars, silent witnesses to a love story born between the pages of books and the dust of old secrets. 1 year later, the June sun flooded the garden of the Boston writer's residence, transforming the grass into an emerald carpet and the flowers into multicolored jewels. Under the great 100-year-old oak tree, about 30 chairs had been arranged in a semicircle, occupied by an attentive and moved audience. Avery, dressed in a simple white dress, stood in front of a small table covered with embroidered fabric. At her side, Elliot couldn't take his eyes off her, as if hypnotized by the light that seemed to emanate from her entire being. "Today, we celebrate much more than a publication," Avery began, her clear voice carrying easily in the garden's attentive silence. "We celebrate the rebirth of a community, the transformative power of words, and the possibility each of us has to reinvent our story." In front of her was placed a freshly printed book, the collective collection of works by the house's residents, accompanied by a photographic documentary on the reconstruction of the New Orleans Library. This project, born from the ashes of a disaster, had transformed into a symbol of hope and resilience. In the audience were the young writers, of course, but also former workers from the Louisiana factories that Elliot had closed, now trained in building trades or cultural mediation, thanks to the Reparation Fund. There were Sister Margaret and other nuns from the Vermont orphanage, Elliot's father, visibly moved, and even Marcus, who had finally embraced his friend's vision after months of skepticism. "This book isn't just an object," Avery continued. "It's a bridge between worlds that would never have met otherwise, between privilege and deprivation, between tradition and innovation, between past and future." Her eyes met Elliot's, and a complicit smile passed between them. "A little over a year ago, I entered an office with glass walls, without imagining that my life would change forever. I had come to catalog books, but I ended up discovering a much more important story, the one that connects us all, beyond our differences." She then invited Ethan to join her. The young man, who had gained confidence during the year, advanced with dignity. His first novel, included in the collection, had already attracted the attention of several New York publishing houses. "Words save us," he said simply. "They saved me, who had nothing else. And thanks to Avery and Elliot, they continue to save other people like me." The ceremony continued with readings of chosen passages, moving testimonies, and finally, the symbolic signing of copies destined for each library of the Foundation. When the official part concluded, the guests dispersed into the garden, forming small groups animated by passionate conversations. Avery and Elliot discreetly moved away toward the small house at the bottom of the garden, that space he had offered her a year ago, and which had become their privileged refuge. Inside, simplicity reigned, a large wooden table, shelves overflowing with books, and a window open to the Massachusetts landscape. "You were magnificent," said Elliot, tenderly embracing her. Avery nestled against him, savoring this moment of calm after the intensity of shared emotions. "I was terrified. Speaking in public remains a challenge for me. No one would have guessed. You were literally radiant." She moved slightly away to look at him, her face impressed with a serene joy. "It's because I believe in what we are doing, in what we've built together." Elliot gently caressed her cheek, marveling at the journey accomplished. In 1 year, their relationship had matured, deepening through challenges faced together. Avery had obtained her literature degree with honors, while directing the residence and actively participating in the Foundation's projects. He had progressively reoriented his business activities towards socially responsible investments, without ever sacrificing profitability, proving that another way of doing business was possible. "I have something for you," he said, extracting a small package from his pocket. Avery took it with curiosity. Inside was a key, different from the one he had offered her a year ago. "Another key?" she asked, smiling. "You have a habit to break." "This one is special," he responded. "It's the key to our future." He then knelt, taking her hands in his. "Avery Collins, you taught me that true wealth isn't accumulated but shared. You showed me that it's never too late to become the person one was destined to be. Will you build the rest of this adventure with me as my wife?" Avery's eyes filled with tears, but her smile left no doubt about her answer. "Yes," she murmured, "1,000 times yes." Their kiss sealed this promise, while through the open window came the joyful echoes of the celebration. Two worlds that should never have met had intertwined to create something new, greater than the sum of their parts. Later, when the sun began to decline, they rejoined their guests. A long table had been set in the garden, uniting people from all horizons around a simple but warm meal. Elliot's father was conversing with the nuns, Marcus was attentively listening to the projects of a young writer, and Ethan was telling stories that made the neighborhood children, invited for the occasion, laugh. Avery observed this scene with wonder, aware of the daily miracle this improvised community represented. Elliot followed her gaze and understood her thoughts, without her needing to express them. "Sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a simple question," he said softly, recalling their first meeting. Avery nodded, squeezing Elliot's hand in hers. "And sometimes the most important answers are those that completely transform us." As night fell on the garden, lanterns were lit, creating a magical atmosphere. Someone began to play the guitar, and soon songs rose in the summer-perfumed air. Avery and Elliot remained there, silent witnesses to this unexpected harmony, knowing that their story was only beginning. For certain stories never truly know an end. They continue to resonate in the lives they touch, creating echoes that traverse time, like the pages of a book one never tires of rereading. True love isn't that which expresses itself in grand gestures, but that which patiently rebuilds what life has broken, in us, around us, and between us.